Hey everyone, it's Alan over at Cobblers Plus, and in today's video we're going to be working on these Echoes here. See, those are really rough shape. So, let's start resoling them. Alright everyone, so as you can tell, these are in some rough shape. For those of you who don't know, this is what's called dry rot. You can see that it's just ripping apart into little bitty pieces, falling apart, and yeah, it's rotting. There's two different terms. There's a dry rot, and then there's another form of rot also. I never know the difference, honestly, and I just call it dry rot across the board. But for us, this is actually dry rot because it's all dried out and it's just all kinds of nasty and everything. So it's definitely time to resole these. Now, I haven't ever done a video yet on a pair of Echoes, and I know there's a lot of people out there that turns out think that Echoes can't be resoled. Well, that's kind of a myth. They can be resoled, mostly because they are obviously a molded sole, and a lot of people think that, well, it's a molded sole, there's nothing that can be done about it. There is. It just comes down to cost. Most of these shoes out here that are molded construction like this, they're not worth getting resold. But if it's a pair that's, you know, vintage, a model that's no longer available, or sentimental value to it, it can be done. It's just, again, cost is the big factor to consider, because in this case we're having to tear off everything, including this decorative welt here that's around the edges. And again, that's part of the sole. Actually, it's not even really a welt, it's actually part of the molding process that they do. And so all of that's gonna have to come off. Sometimes when you don't have any issues with the dry rotting going on, you can actually salvage that decorative area there of the welt. Again, imitation welt, but you can salvage it and kind of use it and work off of that. But this one is just so far gone, there's no way of saving it. So at this point, I'm quite literally just going to start ripping everything off, because if I just take this straight to the sander, what happens is this stuff actually melts on the sander and it clogs up our sanding belts and everything. And so I want to remove it as much as I can. So I'm just going to start tearing through it more and more, and then we'll move on to the sander. All right. Alright everyone, so I've sanded out as much as I could. If I keep going, there's actually stitching right underneath here. You can see some of it a little bit frayed up there. It's still intact, holding in most of the places, obviously, but I have to make sure not to sand it down too far, otherwise it's just going to be a huge mess. Now this is one of the downsides with dry rot, and when it comes to, you know, shoes that have a molded sole on them is that you can't get all of it out completely. There's just no way. It's not possible. No solvents are going to work. Basically, anything else that you do to it is only going to make it worse and worse and worse. And so in order to not get to that level of worseness, in other words, we're going to go ahead and stop at this point, and this small amount that's left over is not going to cause any kind of issues for us, because the midsole that we're going to put on is actually going to also get stitched on. But at this stage, as an extra layer of protection, I'm using a really thin super glue that's like super thin, to use it as kind of a binding agent, also as a primer for the contact cement to be able to go onto. This contact cement actually, or this super glue, will have a chemical reaction with all this nylon and everything. It may even smoke up a bit, so let me see if I can get it to do so for you guys. The smell on this is just, you don't want to smell it, trust me guys. You really don't. It burns the nose hairs. That's why I sit down also to try to get away from the fume of it. Oh, there was a little bit of smoke. Just a little, might be able to see it, so. Alright. Yeah, sometimes some of these materials, oh, there's some more smoke there. Some of these materials will smoke up so bad, like you almost wonder if it's going to catch fire or what and everything, but it's just a little bit of smoke. I don't know if the camera's even catching it there, but it's so strong, and also the heat coming off of it, like right now, is pretty warm actually. If I put my hand on it, it can get so hot it can practically burn you too. It's the same thing with nylon materials. Like if you get a nylon strap off of a backpack or something, put super glue on it, it's going to smoke up, it's going to heat up, it's going to melt that nylon as well. You do not want to put your finger on it because it will burn like crazy. It's the same story with a lot of the shoe dust that we use too. It has that chemical reaction occur perfectly and everything, where it gets hot and it smells bad and everything, and it burns your nose hairs. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the edges around here real quick too, as best I can, and then let that dry for a little bit. It tends to dry very quick, but I'm still gonna give it some time to dry. Afterwards, I'm going to go ahead and start prepping the welt. So we're going to try to keep this as original as possible. I've got this welt that I've shown to the customer before. This is actually a synthetic crepe-like material, like not quite a crepe actually. It's a form of rubber welting here that will kind of keep it looking as original as possible. It doesn't have really that decorative like pressed-in pattern, but it's fairly close enough where it's going to be similar design and everything, and we can still use it nicely. And oof, that's hot still. I accidentally touched it. We're going to be able to put this around the perimeter of the shoe to give it that welted look. Plus, it gives us a good pattern to be able to work off of when we're trimming it out, and it helps cover up a lot of this edging. I mean, we're still going to fix up a lot of that edging at the end of it and buff it out and work on it some more, but this is going to be our key thing to make sure that we get lined up nicely on here. Oh, the key thing is the priming it, actually. The glue and everything. Still kind of sticky a little bit. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and glue all that together, and I'll let you guys see what it looks like. All right, everyone. So I just pulled this out of the oven, so I got to work. Well, I'll probably stick it back in for just a quick second, because if I'm going to be talking and explaining. But here's that welt that I put on. There's still a little bit of glue you can see around the edges. That will get cleaned up towards the end. I just had to make sure that all the surface areas were covered nicely and everything. But that's what it's looking like so far right there. And it's nicely primed, so there's not going to be any issues with those little small sections there. So go ahead and stick that midsole on. I had to let, that's just sometimes why it's such a slow process. I have to let the, ooh, that's hot, that welt cure overnight. Sorry, I had a hammer there. Let that welt cure overnight, then the midsole goes on, then that cures overnight, then I can finally stitch it and then get the sole glued on. The sole is going to be a little bit easier to work with, in other words, and I can, after it cools off, pretty much continue on with it. But for now, that's where we're at. We got the midsole on. I'm going to put that on the press it all out, let it cool, and then tomorrow I'll be back in, get ready for stitching. Alright everyone, so we're over at our Blake stitch machine here now. We're going to go ahead and stitch on the midsole here that I've gone put on. I've trimmed up the edges a little bit. They are a little wide at the moment, and I've gone ahead and did a little bit of channeling. This channeling is not going to do any functional purpose for us. It's strictly just for me as the cobbler to make sure I get the stitches as close as I can to that line there. Now obviously I'm not going to be able to get it directly on that line, but the goal is to try to get it as straight and as even as possible to that line, just because again we've got a new welt and everything, and the overall construction of the shoes changed up quite a bit. So let's just go ahead and get started on the stitching. Alright everyone, so we got everything finished out. Give him a little bit of a buff over there. Got the insoles back in there. He's had multiple layers in there with those, but that kind of gives you an idea of what a resole looks like on a pair of Echoes. Now I know a lot of you will say it's not worth it. Obviously we know that it's not worth it. We even advise a lot of people and say that most cases these Echoes are really designed to be worn out and tossed. They have injection molding soles that they usually do on almost all their models, where basically this upper of the shoe gets set down into a mold and then it gets injected with the rubber compound and then cures. So it makes it a little tougher to resole most Echoes, but why not make a video out of it for the first time of us doing a resole like this. It's not the first time we've done a resole with Echoes, but first time we're doing a video for sure. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, preferably small or short questions. But if it's something more detailed, I would recommend either giving us a call, message us on Facebook or Instagram at CobblersPlus or CobblersPlusCO. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell icon to be notified when we have our next video out. And we'll see you next time.
All right.